Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing. With your hosts, Mercedes Pollmeyer and Katja Dev.
Welcome back to another episode, and today we're going to talk about how to increase your climbing capacity for longer days outside. And this is a question we actually got in our membership, and Katja and I tried to answer it, and we realized, we need a lot more context in order to answer this question well. And so in today's podcast, that's what we're going to try to do and give you some different scenarios as well, like what could this mean for you as a climber going outside as maybe a sport climber or a boulderer. So yeah, that's what we're going to try to do today. And again, I'm joined by Katja. Hello. She's here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Tell us about your office, Mercedes, for people watching on YouTube. You might be able to tell that her office looks very different today.
Yeah, I have some horses in the background, and you might hear some wildlife as well. I'm just outside in a parking lot in Leavenworth. This has to be my podcast studio for today because the internet where I'm staying in Leavenworth is just really not good at all, and I wasn't anticipating that. But you know what? An outdoor podcast studio is never a bad thing. I definitely love being out here, and it smells really great. It smells like the outdoors. But yeah, so I'm in Leavenworth for about a month. So right now we're in September, approaching mid-September. And I'm out here for about a month, and the goal is to get comfortable on rock again. And actually, this is really good timing of this podcast because my goal is also to increase my capacity to send more climbs in the moderate range for me. So that's like my goal is V6 to V8 outside, and hopefully being able to do many in one day. I'm not really going for really hard projecting this season. My body just isn't quite ready for that yet. So, that's what I'm excited about for this season in Leavenworth.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you to be out there for a whole month. Yeah, very, very jealous, but very excited for you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get started with this podcast. So the first thing, the topic is how to increase your climbing capacity for longer climbing days. Specifically, I think outdoors. That's what we're going to kind of focus on. And the first thing that I'd like to do is just define what capacity is. And a lot of coaches actually use this word in different ways. Might change the definition, but mostly the definition is very similar depending on which coach you're talking to. And to me, capacity means fitness. A lot of people still don't know what fitness really means, though. I think people who maybe they haven't run in years and then they go and run for the first time and they say they're not fit. Of course, you're not going to be fit because that thing that you're doing, the running, you just haven't practiced it at all. So you're not going to have any fitness for it. And so the same goes for climbing. If you are looking to increase your capacity or your fitness, it has to be specific to the thing that you're doing. So if you are looking to increase your climbing capacity for moderate climbs all day on ropes, then you need to tailor your training program so that it mimics what you're going to do on those days outside. So that's, capacity doesn't mean endurance. It doesn't mean intensity. It just means that you have to be fit enough to do the thing that you're looking to do.
Yeah, and one of the ways of how we like to prepare our athletes is in the most specific way possible, which is why Mercedes just said, if your goal is to climb moderates on ropes, that's going to be your best way to get ready for that. Now, I will tell you hands down, I love climbing on ropes. And sometimes people don't know this because I boulder a lot. And I want to put out an episode pretty soon about how you can prepare for ropes bouldering. So you can definitely train bouldering. If you want to climb on ropes, it's a great way to prepare. However, it's not as specific. So if you know exactly what you want to do, and you're not looking for general improvement in certain areas or just general improvements in general, you have a climbing trip coming up or you have a season coming up, and these are your goals for the season, the more specific your goals, the more specific you want to train for, at least if you can. And so that's the first thing we want to talk about, because sometimes we get this general question of how can I increase my capacity? And I think to answer it best, we're always going to have to talk about specific situations. there's going to be ways for us to increase our general capacity, but it might not be as useful to you. So that's why we thought that's the first thing we thought we would start with. So in Mercedes' case, maybe we can do that. I think we're going to just walk through some examples instead of generalizing too much. So Mercedes' goal is to be able to climb in her moderate range, and she wants to be able to do quite a few boulders either in a given day or in a given week. She just really wants to get a lot of volume in the V6 to V8 range. Now, actually, can we talk about what does V6 to V8 mean to you in terms of, because defining something as moderate is really tricky. I often get this question like, what is moderate? Because of course, moderate is different for different people, right? And so, but one thing that's nice might be to say it relative to your on-site grade on that given rock. So let's say your moderate range. What would be your on-site grade that you feel comfortable on-siting at least 50% of all the boulders in Leavenworth? What would that be for you?
Yeah, right now my on-site is probably V5.
V5.
And
yeah.
V5.
So your moderates, yeah. So your moderates are actually just like, they are not at on-site level. They are above on-site level, but they are close to on-site level. They're just a couple points above, like maybe +1 to +3 for you. Right?
And that's just right now because of the state that my body is in. You know, I'm
yes.
not
Yeah.
I'm not able to project double digit right now. There's just no way. And V9 will feel very, very difficult. But when I say like moderates, I'm actually going to things that I have already done. And I'm my goal is to repeat those. And so to me, they're like in my body, they are gonna feel a little bit easier compared to me going and doing something brand new, you know. So the definition is definitely really important. If I were to have a moderate session on a moon board, that would be V4, you know, V4/V5. You know, on the tension board, it's probably more like V5/V6 on things that I've never done before. So for me, like Leavenworth right now, I have to work up to V6 outdoor. You know, yesterday I climbed, I was able to do a V4, and I'm really excited about that. But I think that because of my experience, I'm going to be able to get up to repeating V6 probably by next week and slowly start ramping up.
Yeah.
The grade.
I mean, this is actually a great discussion, because I think this idea of difficulty and where to work at is a difficult one for people to answer. So let me rephrase the question. Another way of defining moderates for you would be expected attempt or session time that you need on the boulder, because your moderates are different right now, partially because you're also repeating, which means they should go faster, right? But let's say when you climb moderates, Mercedes, how many sessions are you expecting to spend on these climbs when you're doing moderates?
Yeah, my goal, like moderates should be within a couple of attempts. You know, even flashing. Moderates could be hard flashes to a couple of attempts. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think that's a wonderful definition. Yeah, for me, it's usually, I consider for myself moderate something that can do in a day, usually.
Yeah.
So that's how I consider moderates. I had the pleasure to go outside yesterday, and I did some moderates. And for me, outside on ropes, I would be climbing 512, like lower to mid 512, depending on the routes. But I am, expecting those to take me no longer than a session, depending on the route, obviously. So I'm doing something similar as Mercedes at the beginning of my season. I'm just trying to focus on just getting back into climbing, building some capacity outside by starting with doing a bunch of moderates, as many as I can, essentially.
Yeah, and my approach right now is to, because I haven't climbed outdoors at this level in a very long time, like a couple of years, the way that I'm going to start building capacity for what I want to be able to accomplish by the end of the season, for me, the end of the season is going to be beginning of October, is to climb outside as much as possible in a day. And I have like an attempt kind of like goal for each day. So yesterday, I think I might have done 12 attempts in that session, and then see how I feel. And that was all between V0 and V4. And then as I go outside more and more, I'm probably going to like increase those attempts up to about maybe 20 attempts, but keep the intensity in the lower to moderate range. So starting at V2 up to V5, and then V3 up to V6, and slowly increasing that intensity instead of increasing the amount of attempts that I'm doing. Because the more attempts that you give yourself, the lower your intensity is going to be when you're climbing. So you're going for more endurance when you're increasing your attempts. And that's not what I want. I want to be able to climb at a moderate to high intensity for a given amount of attempts. So I'm giving myself a roughly like 15 to 20 attempts in each day and seeing what I can do.
So let's say, why are you choosing that over doing easier problems but more of them?
Because I'm not trying to increase my endurance. I have pretty good endurance. So in the gym, like I just tested my arcing on a 25-degree wall and it's 5 minutes. And that's pretty good for a boulderer. And so I don't think my endurance, I don't need endurance for the things that I'm doing. I need to be able to do multiple attempts at a moderate and to high intensity. And I just don't have that yet. So that's why climbing at a low intensity is not going to help me get better at the moderate to high intensity attempts.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. So essentially, just to bring it back to us, what you're doing is, you're kind of preparing yourself in a very goal specific way. Yeah. Right. That's what you're doing. And you're doing it in a very systematic way too. I really loved how you said at the beginning, when you went out for the first session, what was the defining factor for how many attempts you gave? How did you decide to stop on your first day outside after how many attempts? Did you come in with that number before? Or were you like, hey, I'm going to just count my attempts and see how I feel, and then you stopped climbing?
I wish my approach was a lot more scientific, but it's not. I was like, I want to go to a boulder that I've done before and do every boulder problem on that boulder and just see how I feel, because it's the first day out in Leavenworth since the spring. So it was not scientific. And the reason why I stopped is because the sun was going down and I started to hear a lot of wildlife sounds that were starting to freak me out because I was outside by myself. And I am terrified of wildlife. Oh, dangerous wildlife. I love deer. That's great. I would love to see a deer, but it would still freak me out. So I did all of the climbs in 40 minutes because I was kind of like rushing through it because I didn't want to be out there by myself when the sun was going down. So not scientific at all, but I knew ahead of time. I was like, I'm going to go to one boulder, do everything on that boulder, and see how my fingers feel, how my shoulders feel. And that was my decision. It was just get ready for rock on that first day.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And so what is going to be your approach from here on out to increase the amount of climbing that you can do outside?
Yeah, and it's really important that I take rest days. So today I am going to try to climb a little bit with some friends and going out and trying like V5, maybe V6, and seeing where I'm at. I want to see where my body is at with those grades. If it is surprising in terms of, I am not ready, then I might switch my focus to repeating as many V4s and V5s in Leavenworth. But I have a feeling I'm feeling like pretty good. I felt pretty good yesterday. So it's another testing day for me and just seeing where my body is. And if it feels good, then my goal is to go to boulders that are in the, V4 to V6 range for the next maybe like 4 or 5 sessions. But over those sessions, start to replace one of the lower grades with a slightly harder grade, if that makes sense. So if I only have 15 attempts each session, and the attempts might span easy, moderate to slightly hard, I'm going to try to replace some of those easy attempts with some moderate attempts. Does that make sense?
So you're slowly increasing the intensity of your sessions.
That's right. But keeping the volume the same.
Which is important, because we actually just had this discussion off the mic before. One of the things that's very tricky and that we want to talk about, it is doable, but essentially whenever you want to increase the volume of something, it's really difficult to also increase the intensity. Now, if you're trying to increase volume and intensity, and when I say intensity, what I mean is, more effort per move, more energy spent per move. So intensity usually means harder grades, but it doesn't have to be if that's a slab, for example, right? But so intensity just means more effort spent per move climbing or per attempt climbing. So increasing the intensity and the volume at the same time is going to be really challenging. And if you do both, you're going to be increasing volume and intensity at much slower rates if you do it at the same time. So generally speaking, to give you some concepts, the way we like to do it is we like to keep one of those parameters fixed. So let's say in Mercedes' case, what she's doing, she's sticking with the number of attempts, approximately 15 per session. And instead of doing more attempts per session, she's trying to increase the intensity, meaning she's trying to get up to this like moderate grade climbing level that she's talked about. And so she's going to do that progressively.
Yeah, I think a really stupid thing to do would be, okay, I have these 15 attempts that are V0. So yesterday, V0 to V4. It would be really dumb for me to then go out in my next session and only climb V5 attempts for those 15 attempts. Like my intensity has jumped way too much in that session. So you do have to keep in mind the last session that you just had. How did you feel? And then slowly ramp up from there. And so I think a lot of people actually make this mistake. I think this is how actually a lot of people get injured, because they might keep the attempts the same, but they increase the intensity way too quickly. It's, they're not approaching it like a ladder. It might be more like a box jump, and that's not what we want to do. The body doesn't adapt that way. It's very slow in how it adapts. And so you have to progress your climbing sessions with that in mind.
Yeah, totally. To be fair, too, at the beginning, when you go outside, the progression of your climbing initially might be faster than towards the end. Meaning when Mercedes goes out next time, you don't have to be as rigid as, saying, oh, you just tried, 3v3s or 3v0s and maybe 1v4. You don't have to now go just one step at a time, where now you do 2v0s and 2v4s, with moderates in between. The idea being you can still listen to your body, but just don't go from doing very easy climbing to really hard climbing right away. Use some way of progressing. If the second or third session V1s do feel like V0s, you can do slightly larger jumps, but keep in mind to not just jump too high and too much, and again, in order to prevent that injury. And I'm saying this too because partially too, time is of the essence for a lot of us, when we climb outside. So of course, like really slow progression would be ideal, but not everybody gets to climb outside for a ton. So we want to really find that medium level. But yeah, it's really important to have the long game in mind. And again, it can really help if you have some goals. Like as you actually heard Mercedes say right away, which is awesome. And that's one of the things I would say sets a lot of coaches aside when I speak to climbing coaches, is a lot of climbing coaches, they have a general goal in mind. And the goal is not just to send a hard route. A goal could be for Mercedes, the goal is just to increase her capacity for her moderates. And the long-term goal is to get back to hard climbing. And she just knows the stage that she's in right now is she just needs to do more moderate climbing and, to prime her body essentially for next year. That's what she's doing. She's really playing the long game because she knows she's coming back from injury. She's come back from some time off. And so she's really not trying to rush the process. So there's like big goals, they're really long-term goals. And then we split those big goals into smaller goals and seasonal goals. So that's what Mercedes is doing, which is really, really awesome. And of course, she's going to adjust her goals, which is also one of the things that you said is really important. She's going to adjust her goals as she's going to see how her body feels on the rock.
Yeah.
One of the things we haven't talked about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, being flexible with the goal is also really important. Like I think we might focus so much on the goal and like, oh, I have to get there, and even if my body is not feeling good, I'm still gonna just push, and that's also a mistake. Like every day, just check in, how you feeling. If by the like 8th attempt you're not feeling it, you should probably call that session or go to much easier things. So have that flexible mindset as you're approaching your capacity training.
Yeah. So actually, now that you mentioned this, I want to share this one tip with people, which Sometimes when I go outside and I'm just not feeling the harder climbs, and then when I say harder climbs, I mean the harder climbs that I set out for a given session. This might be not a super hard climb, but I might just not be feeling well. And, as a woman, this might even be related to my period. I don't know. It depends on, who you are. It could also be that you just had a hard week at work, or your kids were sick and up at night. There's many reasons for why you might not be feeling your prime and trying hard. But as a mom, or a working mom too, my time to climb outside is really minimal. So I generally try to still make use of the climb at the time that I have outside, even when I don't feel well. So here's what I do when I feel like I can't climb hard. I very much try to go for easier boulders and just do more of them. The reason for that is I feel like climbing outside is such a unique skill. It is really hard to mimic in the gym. The climbing is so unique and different, and especially bouldering outside, because we hardly top out at the gym. And if we do top out at the gym, the top outs are very different than the top outs outside. So I do think it's worth getting the mileage in outside. So if I'm not feeling well, I just go and find a bunch of easier problems that I might have never done, or problems that I'm trying to repeat, just to get that mileage outside and kind of just to keep practicing that skill of climbing outside. And sometimes it can be really fun, because then I end up climbing those, people call them 1-star problems, but I feel like sometimes I learn a lot more from 1-star problems, because the beta is awkward. An awkward beta, an awkward movement, I feel like teaches me something about my body. So that's what I just end up doing. I have a general rule when I boulder.
Sorry, can I just say something? Because I think this is really awesome, because you are intentionally increasing your conditioning, which is a little different than capacity. Conditioning means that you're actually mentally preparing for what's to come outside. You're practicing the skills that is needed for outdoors. So like the conditioning aspect is something we don't often talk about either. Capacity is primarily just physical, like physically getting your body prepared, whereas the conditioning is like the whole picture that you're trying to improve. And I think with like your approach, that was really good. You're really improving all aspects.
Yeah, that is generally my goal when I go outside. I like to hit a lot of these boxes. So I tend to be very intentional with what I do. Not always, but I'm very thoughtful. And again, part of that is my time outside is so limited. So I always want to make the best of what I have for my time outside. And I would say ideally I work on my conditioning as I'm also working on my physiology, trying to get my body up and running. And so what I share with you guys is, so if my body is not feeling like it wants to do the work that it needs to in order to increase my capacity, I still work on my conditioning. There's still something that I can work on, even on those bad days, instead of just going home. And I will say one more thing is that it helps my mental game. Mental game, not just for sending hard outside mentally, that also, because I get more comfortable. That's the conditioning aspect that Mercedes was talking about. But for me to just be outside. If I have the time to climb outside and I get to just be outside, it's just good for my mental health and my well-being and my happiness. So, and I think it's such an important skill that I had to learn, because I'm a goal-oriented person. I like to climb hard things, but I had to learn to really turn my session around and really make an easy session still purposeful and wonderful and enjoyable. And it still helps me progress in my climbing. So I think actually that's a very important skill to learn for consistency and for long-term progression in your climbing, especially when you have little time outside. Okay, should we talk about other ways to increase capacity for climbing outside? Do you have anything else you want to add, Mercedes?
Well, I'm curious if you want to talk about, like you mentioned at the beginning, that you are a rope climber. Is there, are you going to be rope climbing this season?
Well, this season is a very special season for me. I think this season I'll just grab what I can get. Mercedes said I'm a rope climber, and I share this because I actually had an athlete who's known me for quite some while, who I work with recently, and she might be listening to this. And she thought I was a boulderer. And I was not offended, but I was surprised. And I was like, wait. And I think one reason is that on Instagram and most of the things, it's easier to share bouldering with people. So it makes sense that people think I'm a boulderer. I wouldn't say I'm a sport climber. I like doing both, but I'm definitely not just a boulderer, because I love climbing on ropes. And so for this season, I'll have a different approach, and that's for personal reasons. My approach, I can maybe share this in another episode, because I think it's really relevant and some people might really relate to, having those busy times in their lives. But Yeah, when I prepare for rope season is a little bit different than preparing for bouldering season. And again, that's personal. When I prepare to climb on ropes, the difference is that rope climbing takes a lot more time than bouldering does. Mercedes, you were saying, what did you do? You spent a session yesterday, 15 attempts in 40 minutes. Is that what you said?
12.
12 attempts in 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That's one every 5 minutes. Good job. No, wait, that was wrong math. Never mind. One every 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit different on ropes because, they tend to just take a lot more time. And so 40-minute sessions are much harder to do on ropes. So it looks a little bit different. On ropes, I tend to, the total attempts tend to be lower. So I tend to focus more on ladders versus pyramids. So one of the things we haven't talked about yet is that sometimes what we use for bouldering outside, and you can do this on ropes too, is this idea of building a pyramid, which means you're trying more easier climbs and you're slowly building up harder climbs. And we have a podcast episode on pyramids if you're curious about it. So for rope climbing, I do this a little bit differently. But one of the things that I do want to say for people who don't have a lot of time, who do want to try to climb as much on ropes as possible outside, it's definitely worth having some inside preparation for outside climbing, for sure, on ropes. And again, part of that is conditioning. Part of that is being on the sharp end, being on lead, chalking up, learning how to pace, learning how to read routes, learning how to rest on the route. There's a lot of tactics that go into rope climbing that you can practice inside and, take them outside. But generally speaking, I actually use this for ropes and for bouldering. My first time outside, I really just try to get on routes. I really just think about getting my skin on rock. Literally, that's what I do my very first session, maybe up to 3 sessions, depending on the rock type, because I think that can be quite a limiting factor for people. And so I don't even have huge goals normally the first couple times I go outside. I just want to get my skin acquainted to the rock and also my mind and my feet. Like yesterday, I went outside and I kept telling my friend, there's no feet, there's no feet. And she was like, no, there's just a ton of feet. There's a ton of feet, because outside, you don't have colors that indicate which holds to use. Handholds are easier to find because they're chalked up, but feet are everywhere. And what my friend was trying to tell me, I just came back from the gym, so I'm like looking for obvious feet. But the beautiful thing about climbing outside is once you get used to the rock outside is you can literally find feet everywhere because you can use anything as feet. So when I go outside, there's just a few things that I focus on. One is getting my skin on rock. The second one is getting my feet on rock because footwork is so different on real rock than climbing outside. And the third one is really just like dealing with the outside circumstances, like being on real rock in terms of route reading, comfort, dangers potentially. Yesterday, I actually backed off a climb that was normally very easy for me. I would have expected to onside this climb. It was a 511C. I did it as my first warm-up, and it was a good ego check for me because I ended up coming off the climb because I was so nervous to deck. The crux was really low. I couldn't read the rock really well. And here's what I learned. I learned that I made a really good decision because I didn't just go for it. Because after I up-clipped the rope, I realized I would have gone the wrong way and I probably would have fallen and potentially decked. So I chose not to go for it, even though normally this would be a very doable climb for me, but then I got it the next time I did it. So that's just so I go outside essentially initially more thinking about the conditioning that Mercedes talked about versus the physiology to really get myself on the rock. But I think about the physiology at the same time. I definitely keep myself in check to not try too hard. And so what I did yesterday is my first day on ropes outside. I actually just did 4 pitches. I did this 11C as a warm-up. Then I tried a C bolt to bolt. Then I sent the 12C second go. And then I just kind of cooled down on this 12A that I didn't send. But I, went something like I went a few bolts and then I went bolt to bolt. And just to learn about the climb. And that was a really great first day for me. I got to climb some moderates. Some of them I sent, the other ones I didn't, and that was totally fine. It was a perfect day. And I only had time for 4 attempts. That was in 4 hours. So that was my perfect day.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I think before we end, I just want to give some maybe some examples of different scenarios and maybe how to identify where you need to work your capacity, because again, the question that we got was how to increase your climbing capacity for longer days, and we kind of alluded to well, what is your goal, and then adjust your training to your goal. And the first thing, if you, let's say you're a multi-pitch climber and you have to do 10 pitches at 5.8. Maybe normally you can climb 5.8 and it's no problem, but doing back-to-back 5.8 for 10 pitches when it's hot out, are you hitting a wall by, pitch 6? That probably means you need to work a little bit more on your endurance. That is the limiting factor, is that, okay, you might need to expose yourself to a little bit like hotter conditions and work on your endurance, and maybe have some hydration tactics, or like make sure that you're eating snacks on the way. I know that we had some notes in here to talk about some nutrition tricks that you can do to increase your capacity, but definitely like keep that in mind, because fuel is going to keep you going. So in this instance, you could climb V8, but you can't climb 10 pitches of 5.8. That means you need to do more 5.8s in a session. And usually you can use your longer, it's good to have one day a week where you're testing how long you can go in a day. And in this case, it would be how many 5.8s you can do in a row. Maybe for some other people, it's, I want to try 5.12 and I want to get 4 of them in a day. And that means they're probably out there all day, but you're taking hours rest between each climb. So you have to figure out, where is your limiting factor? Where do you need to build capacity? Is it that you have to increase how many attempts you could do at a higher intensity, or is it that you need to go for longer on something easier? And those are kind of like the two ends of the spectrum, and of course there's stuff in the middle as well. So I want y'all to kind of think about that. If you have this question, think about what is it that you're preparing for, and then where is your limiting factor in that.
Yeah, totally. I think that's what makes this. Yeah,
it's raining. It's starting to rain. So we might need to cut this short, but did you have any last comments to add?
Yeah, the last thing I just wanted to say, when we get this question, how can I increase my climbing time in a given day? It's tricky, because is the question now, do you have all day and now you just need to fuel yourself and rest appropriately to send harder all day long? So those are tactics and strategies. Make sure you're fueled well, you rest well, you drink and eat well. That's really important. Or is it more that you have a given time, like Mercedes in terms of attempts, or like me, when I go outside, I usually just have 4 hours. And now it's more of a physiological problem where, I'm trying to increase what I can do in that different time. So now I'm working on tactics a little bit, but also just my physiology to bring it up. So I guess, I know we talked about this before we got on. The answer to this question is just tricky, and we don't want to simplify it too much. There's no simple way of just increasing your time outside, except to like slowly increase the things you're doing over time with a goal in mind. So if your goal is to climb harder outside, don't do a bunch of easier stuff necessarily all the time. Really keep in mind what you're working towards, and then make sure each session you're slowly changing your session to progress towards that goal. And if anybody has a more specific question, like the more specific the questions we can get, the better we can answer them. So if anybody wants to drop a question below, email us, message us with any questions. We love answering people's questions. So send them our way. And we're going to hop off so Mercedes is not getting wet.
We're going to hop off real quick. Yeah. But this is also why coaching is really important. I think this is where coaches can really help athletes with these very specific things, because it is a little complicated. There's a lot of nuance. And knowing an athlete really well, that is the defining factor in how we can get someone to their goal, is knowing them really well and then taking them toward their goal. So yeah, advocating for coaching. Okay.
Sounds great.
Getting completely wet. All right. That was fun.
Okay. Good to talk to you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.